Screenwriting credits. It seems like a very innocuous type of thing. You write the story, you get credit, right? Doesn't seem like a hard thing to do. However, so here's a couple cases where the person who wrote the movie didn't get the credit they want, or people who didn't really write the movie got credit that they shouldn't have had. The Expendables. After David Callahan received a co-writing credit for The Expendables by WGA, Sylvester Stallone and the producers of the film sued Callahan for fraud, claiming that he overstated his role in writing the film. Stallone claimed that he only based a few of his characters on the 2002 script that Callahan had written. Nevertheless, Callahan received a story by credit and top billing as screenwriter, much to Stallone's dismay. Or how about this one? Now, despite the fact that Michael Bay worked closely with Jonathan Hensleigh for 9 months on the script for The Rock, the WGA decided in its arbitration hearing to deny Hensleigh's screenwriting credit in favor of David Weisberg and Douglas F. Cook, who wrote the spec script. The Bay was so upset with the WGA's ruling, he wrote an open letter calling the WGA arbitration process a sham, a travesty. He claimed that Weisberg and Cook had a really good idea, but that had he directed the movie they wrote, it would have been terrible. Now, some may suggest that the movie he did direct was terrible, but I actually love The Rock. Now, in most cases, no matter how little of the screenplay is eventually used, the very first screenwriter to produce a script will receive a screenwriting credit. This was the case in X-Men First Class, another dispute involving Sheldon Turner, who drafted the original X-Men Origins Magneto screenplay. Though several more screenwriters were brought aboard, and the project was essentially started again from scratch when Matthew Vaughn came aboard, Turner was still given story credit on the screenplay. However, two other screenwriters who were involved early on, but not first, were not. Josh Schwartz of the OC and Jamie Moss were not given any credit at all. So as you can see, it's important to know how the credit system works in the WGA, and it's not an easy thing to understand. So let's take a couple moments today and break down what all those different things mean on the screen. And my information for the article today will come from Screencraft, and I'll link that in the description below. Let's take a moment and take a look at this confusing system and see what screenplay by means, or story by means. Let's get started. So written by. Now, this credit is used when the writer or writing team is entitled to both the story by, which we'll talk about in a couple moments, and the screenplay by credit. Now, if there is ever a pre-existing source material for the screenplay, short story, novel, graphic novel, etc., this credit cannot be used because it refers to the fact that the credited writer is the originator of the film's story. Now, research material, depending upon how much is used, does not deprive the screenwriter for this particular credit. Story by. Now, if a signatory production company or studio purchased the story from a professional writer, the writer is entitled to this credit, even if they are later replaced by writers that are later credited with the overall final script. This happens a lot in Hollywood. Now, another instance where the credit is used is when a screenplay is based upon a story that is a sequel to the original work. And it doesn't stop there. Many ask, why don't producers get any writing credit if they conceive a story and get out to hire writers for it? They do, but it usually constitutes the writing of a treatment, at least. A prime example is Steven Spielberg and his involvement with the 1982 classic Poltergeist. Fun fact, more than two writers may not share story credit. Screen story by. Now, this credit is utilized much less these days. When and if you do see this particular credit refers to a writer that has taken previous source material and conceptualized a new and different story from it, using the source material only as sort of a springboard. You only really find this as a result of arbitration. Most of the time you'll see the author of the source material get credit that specifies the specific platform, from a play by, from a novel by, from a Saturday Evening Post story by. You know, you get the gist. And then the actual screenwriter will get a screenplay by credit, or some variation as mentioned before. Adaptation by. Now, this is another credit that you won't see much these days. The Guild tries to limit the number of credits as much as they can. Adapted by has been used, but only as a result of arbitration, when a writer has contributed to the direction of a screenplay without having qualified for screenplay by credit. Which leads us to screenplay by. This is the most widely used screenwriting credit today. Now, screen credit for a screenplay cannot be shared by more than two writers, with the exception to certain cases where names of three writers or the names of writers constituting two different writing teams may be used. That's usually the result of arbitration, where there are a handful of writers, three individual screenwriters, or a combination of different screenwriters and different writing teams that have contributed to at least 33% or more of the screenplay. That percentage is significant for screenwriting credit. If you are a screenwriter that was hired for a rewrite, but the final shooting draft of the script uses just 32% or less of what you contributed after other screenwriters were brought in, you won't be eligible for some screen of credit. Even if some of your dialogue, scenes, sequences, and character names are used, you have to make that 33% cut. So let's say you have a wonderful 10% scene in the movie, and you wrote it, and that's the best scene in the movie. You don't get credit for it because you don't have that 33%. Hey, my name is Paul from ScreenwritingScribe. If you find this information valuable, please feel free to hit the subscribe button below. I talk about screenwriting software as well as just general screenwriting stuff, as well as doing video essays on themes and stuff of movies. So if this is something that you'd like to watch, please follow along for the journey. So what's the difference between ampersands and the word and? Now, when the word and is found in between the names of 2 or 3 different screenwriters, that credit is identifying 2 or 3 different writers that were attached to a project during separate drafts. Now, in some cases, these writers could have worked together to form the final draft, but usually this points to different screenwriters attached at different times for various drafts. When you see an ampersand symbol between screenwriter names, that symbol is connecting them as a writer team. So next, we're going to talk about order of the names. Yes, even that has wide-ranging implications for screenwriters. Now, the most substantial contributors are usually featured first, unless the prearranged order is dictated by the screenwriter's contract beforehand. Now, when in doubt, as to the exact percentage of contribution, or if that percentage is deemed as equal, the names are actually listed alphabetically. Now, have you ever wondered, can a studio buy a script and not credit the original writer? Well, decades ago, this could and unfortunately likely did happen. However, the Guild now ensures irrecoverable story minimums with an original screenplays which are not based on source material and on which the first writer writes a screenplay without there being any other intervening literary material by another writer pertaining to the project, which is the official WHGA way of saying this, basically means that the first writer shall be entitled to no less than a story by credit. So that means nowadays, if someone buys your script, you're going to at least get a story by credit. Even if they have someone come in and completely rewrite your script, you're still going to get story by credit. Now, here's an interesting question, especially with the state of movies, and having, as you can see, that there's a lot of people that come in and rewrite and write stuff. You might be wondering, can a screenwriter actually take their name off of the credits? Now, professional screenwriters have seen their original work or that of which they've contributed to turn into something that they may not want their name attached to. And like I said, you could see that in a lot of our modern movies. Now, you can request to pull your name from the credits, but you have to act fast because arbitration has designated the on-screen credits after the studio submits them for print and marketing preparation. Once the credits have been assigned, there's no going back. But keep in mind that if a screenwriter does this, it will result in loss of any and all rights accruing from receipt of writing credit. In this particular case, the best thing to do is to opt out for the use of a pseudonym rather than withdrawing from the credit. This way, they will not result in forfeiture. Now, there are some specific, if you are wondering, there are some specific requirements for using the pseudonym. However, according to the minimum basic agreement of the Guild, any writer who is entitled to credit on the screen and who has been paid or is guaranteed payment of less than $200,000 for writing services or literary materials relating to this particular motion picture shall have the right to be accorded credit on the screen in advertisements or whatever in a reasonable pseudonymous name. A writer must execute this right within 5 business days after final determination of writing credits. A writer must register the pseudonym with the Guild by sending a written notice to the membership department with the writer's social security number. And a pseudonym must not duplicate the name of pseudonyms of another writer or the name of a public figure. So you can't say that your name is Mark Twain. So lastly, we've talked a little bit about having that 33% in order to get a credit. So how are percentages and contributions to the script really determined? Now, it's not about counting script lines and pages. Arbitrators are tasked to take into consideration these 4 elements in determining whether a screenwriter is entitled to screenplay credit. The first is dramatic construction. The second is original and different scenes. The third is characterization of character relationships. And fourth is the dialogue. Now, needless to say, it takes professionals to assess such differences between drafts. There are cases where all the dialogues have been changed, but the actual scenes and characters are the same in turn. There are cases where just one section of the script, first act, second act, or third act, major sequences, is so substantial that it has changed the screenplay as a whole. So lessons we can learn as a screenwriter. Be sure that when you are on assignment, you are keeping excellent records of what material you are given, the different drafts you write, the changes requested, and the changes you make. Then compare and contrast with further drafts you have access to from additional writers attached to the project or what you see within the finished product. Now, in the end, it's up to the screenwriter to make sure that their screenwriting credit is administered fairly. Whether you like that or not, that's the way that the Guild works. Now, while the Guild arbitration process, as well as on the studio's submission process for on-screen credit, is there to recognize the importance of each writer's contribution to the screenwriter must always, let me emphasize that again, must always keep out a keen eye. Most have it down to science, mind you, but it doesn't hurt screenwriters to do their part just in case discrepancy arises. We've talked about in those first 3 cases, and there's a lot more. I just picked 3 arbitrary cases. But as you can see, it can happen. So the next time you go to the movie, you're going to be more educated on now you know what an ampersand sign means versus the word and. You're also going to know the difference between screenplay by and story by. Well, if you like this stuff, again, hit the like button below. Until the next video, live well and write well.